Hello, beautiful soul. I am Dr. Deyas Wandrea, host of the Conscious Evolution podcast. You may have heard that there have been serious allegations in the psychedelic world. Misconduct, fraud, abuse. There are a number of things that many of us are very, very concerned about. And so on today's episode of the Conscious Evolution podcast, I have the good pleasure of interviewing a colleague and now a friend, Dr. Sandra Dreisbach. This conversation may be triggering, so if you have to pause or maybe not watch this episode, do what you need to do to take care of you. We will be talking about things such as dying by suicide, substance use, and sexual harm. So let me tell you a little bit about this amazing woman. Sandra Dreisbach is an ethicist and psychedelic ethics specialist with an MA and a PhD in philosophy. She's an ethics advisor, active in psychedelic integration, education, and advocacy. Sandra is the community leader of EPIC, Ethical Psychedelic International Community. She's the director of ethics for Nectara, a psychedelic support ecosystem, where she also teaches a course that I highly recommend for therapists and facilitators in this space. And Sandra is also a former leader of the Santa Cruz Psychedelic Society. Sandra taught bioethics at University of California in Santa Cruz for 10 years and worked for many years in the tech industry, primarily at Apple, and she's a Reiki master. So I hope that you will dive into this conversation as we look at some of the ethics violations and allegations that are currently plaguing this industry. Don't lose heart. We also talk about solutions and what you can do to protect yourself, whether you're a therapist or facilitator, or to protect yourself if you are looking to journey. So stay tuned, and please feel free to give me your feedback and check out all of the links in the show notes so that you can stay informed. It's time to upgrade your life. In this podcast and our live events and retreats, we explore ways to hack enlightenment by integrating ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience with transpersonal psychology. From plant medicine and psychedelics to breathwork, mindfulness, and neurofeedback, my guests and I will shine a light on the unique capacity that we have to use our conscious mind to evolve individually and collectively as a species. Tune in each week on your favorite podcast player or the Pennington Media YouTube channel for interviews and discussions about holistic healing of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, burnout recovery, and intentional wellness. Dr. Sandra Dreisbach, thank you so much for joining us on the Conscious Evolution podcast.
What an honor and a privilege. Thank you for having me and to invite me into your audience's lives and your own heart. Thank you.
Well, I am so grateful. I am so grateful that you have agreed to teach in some of my paid courses around psychedelic therapy for therapists. But this conversation I really wanted to have for the whole listening world to hear. Ethics, ethics, ethics. It is a topic that most people do not love as much as you do.
I really do love it. It's true.
Yeah, I've noticed, like, you kind of nerd out. I've had the good pleasure of being in this most recent course that you started around ethics in psychedelics. And I've been a part of EPIC, the closed community for ethics in psychedelic care. And I can see it. You just nerd out on ethics, and you're not afraid to talk about these really heavy issues and to look deeply into the heart so that we can show up with compassion around these things. So just grateful.
Oh, I really appreciate hearing that. And part of the reason I love it is because, I honestly really want people to feel loved and supported. And so really what I'm nerding out on is finding new ways to love and support each other.
I like that. Well, I have to admit, there have been a lot of questionable ethics coming to light in the psychedelic community. And, I say that that's coming to light right now, but there are a lot of things in the psychedelic world that have been questionable from the very beginning, in the 50s and 60s, when trials were going on with people not even consenting to receiving LSD, for example, prisoners, mental health patients. Of course, in the United States, the CIA was even giving LSD to their agents without telling them. So ethics have actually been a part of the psychedelic story. But recently, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, people like me have said, wow, I've just discovered how revolutionary this could be for mental health treatment. And a lot of us have been very gung-ho looking at, God bless you, looking at all the studies and the personal stories of how psychedelics can really transform mental health treatment and even spiritual exploration. And then we come up with these stories of abuses of power, these power dynamics, sexual misconduct, people lying about what substance they're giving or where it's been harvested from. Like there's a whole host of things. And so when people ask me about it, I usually cringe because I'm like, oh, I just want to talk about the good. Like these bad people, like they're doing bad things, but I don't want it to taint that. But now I'm recognizing, no, we have to have these conversations so that more people are aware. Because now, let's be honest, people are flying all over America and all over the world to sit with a rent-a shaman or a weekend shaman or on their own with these sacred medicines. And there's an incredible potential for harm. And as I've been working with retreat centers, I've discovered some facilitators doing things that are just not ethical. So let's start at the top. Now, you actually taught ethics at a university, bioethics. Let's start off. Now, the way I would sort of define ethics, if just being really basic, is that ethics refers to standards, like moral principles of what is right and what is wrong that helps to guide our behavior. Is that about how you would define ethics?
Well, you're not wrong. In sort of the everyday way of we talk about ethics, and when we often use ethics and morality in exchange. But in terms of a field of study, it's a branch of philosophy that on not just the sort of normative or the prescriptive aspects of what you should or shouldn't do or those standards of conduct, but also descriptive, like when we're thinking about like moral psychology and trying to understand our psychological development ethically, or meta-ethical concerns, which involve questions of like, can we even know what's right? Is it true, right? And sort of like, is it objective? Is it subjective? And so they're larger, whole bunch of issues around the branch of ethics. So when I think of ethics, I'm thinking about my Western training, but I'm also thinking about the very everyday aspect of ethics that you're speaking of. So I think both are true. It's just, when you're speaking in an academic sense, we talk about it differently versus in everyday. But I think most of the time people have a good understanding of what ethics is about. And it's about trying to live a good life.
Yeah.
And what supports it and what doesn't support it. And it doesn't have to come from a hardened space of judgment, but at the same time, it should at least have some aspect of discernment and clarity and grounding in what is valuable to you and your community and the people you care about.
Right. And since we are also going to be grounded in solutions, because some of these ethical quandaries can leave people asking, well, what is the right thing to do? And having discussion, having peer support, having supervision, if you happen to be a therapist, a doctor, a facilitator, those things I think are essential, but we'll get into that. But first, I think let's just tease it up here.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Well, okay. I'm going to give you a case. First off, so for most people, if they think about psychological therapy, you know this well. We talk about this concept of transference, where patients might direct feelings and desires, especially things that might have been unconsciously retained from childhood, and they transfer them to their therapist. The flip side of transference is countertransference, where the therapist might project their own unresolved feelings, beliefs, or experiences onto their clients or their patients. And that can include a whole range of emotions and reactions, including like just being irritated and not knowing, why, rescue fantasies, or even affection. And so for me, when I think about imagining a scenario where a therapist develops a desire to date their patient. Now, typically for us as doctors and therapists, there's a governing body of licensure that dictates rules about relationships. Like you have to end the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, wait 2, 5, 7 years, or for some of them, you're never allowed to have a sexual relationship with a past client. But what I've asked is, what goes on in the mind of someone who decides to act on that desire, even though their ethics board would have told them they shouldn't? And so I've been thinking like it could be linked to this transference or countertransference, including rescue fantasies. We hear these situations where even though it's a clear ethical violation in therapy, crossing that boundary, but understanding this psychological dynamic behind it, where, all right, so let's go with rescue fantasy. The therapist has this unconscious desire to save or heal the patient. And that could be driven by their own needs for validation, for power, or to fix some unresolved issue from the past. But when these fantasies escalate without being addressed or acknowledged or managed, it can distort the therapist's perception of this therapeutic relationship, making them think that, yeah, okay, having a personal relationship with this patient could be beneficial or healing, or it could be true love. Now, I'm giving all of this as a maybe, but I'm curious to hear what you're the expert. Tell me what you think.
Well, I really appreciate this question and this quandary, and I think it's true. I mean, there's a lot of documentation and reference about transference, countertransference, projection, and from an ethics perspective, one of the things that I mention is it's not just about knowing what the right thing to do is, and like doing it, right? It's figuring it out. And so a lot of times people are doing what they think is the right thing, right? Especially when you to like transference, countertransference, like I'm helping them, I'm rescuing them as a person who's gotten into the rescuer mindset myself, right? Like I'm gonna save you, I'm gonna help you, like, I'm gonna come to your aid, right? And looking at and being willing to see like, okay, what part of this is coming out of my own desire, right? On my own ego needs, or and having that self-awareness in a philosophical sense, like knowing yourself, can be really protective and supportive just by the fact that you know where your strengths are, you know where your weaknesses are, where you tend to transfer. And so having that sense of preparation and understanding, even though we're always learning and always growing as individuals, can be really supportive as a sort of an ongoing process, which is why inner work and continuing education is so essential. But it's a lot of times people are thinking that they're doing the right thing. And I think like, and it's actually a challenge in ethics and in teaching about ethics and supporting ethical challenges in terms of solutions, is most people think they are ethical.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying we're all unethical either. It's that we have to recognize that, we're human, we make mistakes, and that's normal, and that ethical isn't about being perfect. And practicing, even if you consider yourself an ethical person and trying to do the right thing, that you're going to make mistakes, and there's going to be times where you will transfer when you didn't realize you were, countertransference, I should say, countertransferring when you didn't realize you were, because it was something you didn't see in yourself. Right. We all have blind spots, which is why other things other than just doing the internal work, having community, having mentors, having people, peer support, where you're talking about cases in a confidential, supportive way that's not in violation of any sort of, therapeutic alliance. All these sort of practices are things that help to build good practice and help catch these things, because we all have blind spots. So I think if we all lean into those aspects, it'll not just help us prevent those sort of harms from happening, but also give us compassion for the fact that we are going to have those challenges, and then that's normal.
Yeah. If you have felt drawn to sit with psilocybin, then I invite you to join us on retreat in the Netherlands, where it is completely legal and safely facilitated with me and an expert team. We are all trauma trained, trauma informed, culturally competent and sensitive facilitators, and you will be held with the utmost care so that you can safely dive into your psyche for deep healing and conscious evolution. So check out our website at onedrea.com. That's the number 1DREA.com. And you can learn more about each of our variety of psilocybin truffle retreats in the Netherlands. I look forward to seeing you there. I think my gut has been just wrenched over the last few days. So here we are in March of 2024, and just recently, the Medical Practitioners Tribunal Service in the UK ruled that Dr. Ben Sessa was impaired because he had a sexual relationship with a former patient who subsequently took her own life. And for many of us in the psychedelic world, we have listened to Ben's talks, we have connected with him at conferences. He's been a very prominent person in the ketamine world. And the question comes up, like, how could this have gone on? He was treating this patient for years. He knew that she was vulnerable, obviously, that she had attempted suicide prior in her life. She was estranged from her husband, and he got into this relationship, and unfortunately it ended horribly. So I guess how do we all make sense of someone, I hate to say it because it feels like a fall from grace, but it's like you say, we are all human. We are all going to make mistakes. And there was some blind spot there. I just wondered, if one were in a supervisory relationship, had a mentor, it seems like the kind of thing that would have come up, like, yeah, no?
Thank you for bringing up this case because I think it's on a lot of people's minds and hearts right now, and because we're experiencing it as a harm, and I want to hold space for that, and also, deepest compassion, sympathies to the family members who've experienced the loss and friends, and make sure encourage people if you're experiencing any suicidality, make sure you get help and support. And I know this content can be triggering for people. So just want to give compassion for all of us and holding space for this conversation and making sure we're all well resourced before we continue. But there are cases where it's not just about the sort of average, sort of everyday error and misconduct. And in this particular case, he's admitted to the harms, and at least to some extent, many people are concerned that maybe not sufficiently to the extent of which, and as well as the decision and whether or not that is sufficient, and whether or not we can really hold people accountable for the level of harm that happens. And this happens to be someone who already had a licensure and had boards and things that could do that accountability process, whereas predominantly in the psychedelic space, that is not present, right? And I just want to honor and respect that too, that we still have a very great need for greater accountability, even at that basic baseline that he is actually receiving right now. But and I cannot speak to his, psychology. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a medical doctor. But at the same time, there have been cases, and many would consider this one of them, that maybe they shouldn't be allowed to practice at all.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that someone should have noticed this earlier. And that, power dynamics, reputation, good research can often detract us from some of these issues, and also prevent the ability of them being addressed in a particular way. The fact that this is a person of influence, people would consider a leader in this space, and this has happened before with Francoise and some other um, leaders in this space, or I should say now former leaders in the space.
Right.
And the fact that how is it that these people got in that particular position of power and caused this level of harm, and not just over a short period of time, over a long period of time, and some say multiple people.
Yeah.
Right. And even affecting, like you're mentioning, training, even being in the position of training other professionals. And so you're even having not just the harm that's happened to the community or in terms of their leadership or in terms of the people they've trained, but that sort of ripple effect that makes it not just more harmful, but also like, how do we address this in a way and feel confident that we're going to be able to create safety and good practice and also just pure accountability, that
Mm-hmm.
if this is happening at the highest levels of the psychedelic practice in the West, worth saying, right? I haven't heard as many in other, like psychedelic practice in how it's been practiced in a Western way. But, and I'm not saying that there aren't practitioners in traditional medicine keepers too. There absolutely are. But worth noting, like there's something about us that it's showing us. There's
Mm-hmm.
something about our practice that we need to look at its very core. And also just in terms of the work itself, right? The same positive aspects about psychedelic therapy and treatment and transformation, whether it's recreational or whether it's healing and helping someone supporting through addiction recovery, through substance dependency. It it has that ability in part because of the transformation ability of the medicines themselves, and that same capacity, like, that sort of line of like, with great power comes great responsibility, but
Mm-hmm.
it's true. It's a double-edged sword, and we need to treat it with greater respect than we do with traditional medicine, or traditional psychiatry, or therapy, or spiritual practices, because of how powerful it really is. And you could even say that some of the problems that exist right now in Western practice and orientation, whether it be therapeutic or otherwise, they're magnified under this particular lens. And so, like, there are problems currently with power dynamics and therapeutic alliance and abuse of therapists to clients, and sometimes people will mention that, but it's to understand the extra vulnerability and the extra power dynamics at play that what would already be a power dynamic by you going to, let's say, even just your ordinary physician, that or naturopath, and getting advice. They're the person with the alleged wisdom and guidance and information, and you are willingly giving up a portion of your power in exchange for their wisdom to help you, to help guide you when and help make the best decisions for you. And the same thing happens in therapy. You're giving up some of that autonomy to an extent, but the therapist or the doctor needs to do their best to support that ability for the person to make their own decisions, knowing right before they've even come to the door that there's an unequal power dynamic. And that's not even introducing things like race, sex, culture, language, gender, all these sort of other uh, biases,
Right.
conscious or unconscious, that even increase that power dynamic and increase that potential for harm. And we're seeing it. And I think the beauty of it, and maybe this switches us a little bit more to the solution orientation, is it's a unique opportunity to look at our shadows, to see this same power dynamic at play across our culture, across our communities, across um, our ourselves, both within and without, because it's also internalized, right? Like that, the reason why the projection and the transference and things like that, at least in my perspective, is an ongoing issue, is because we've internalized those same power
Mm-hmm.
dynamics within as without, and and uh, and it's just so important for us to see this as an opportunity for healing and growth, and not get stuck and the idea of this person did something wrong,
Mhm.
right? And not recognize it they're showing us something about ourselves that we need to learn, heal, transform, address. That's a part of all of us,
Yeah.
while
I just
still saying that person, right? Still.
exactly. Yeah, it's still calling it out where it needs to be called out, but recognizing that how it exists within this larger paradigm of our society and culture. And I just want to double click on the thing that you said about vulnerability. These power
Yes.
dynamics exist all over the place. We navigate them all the time when you're seeing a regular doctor, but under the auspices of psychedelic assisted therapy or psychedelic journeys, once we introduce these magic molecules, these sacred medicines, it changes or it enhances that vulnerability even more. Because when you're in an altered state of consciousness, for many of us, it becomes very difficult to voice consent or withdraw consent, for example, or to to be able to push back against one of these potential authority figures. We're seeing people uh, sharing that in the underground psychedelic world or being off on retreats, there have been significant harms where a person is told having sex with the shaman is going to be what helps your healing. And unfortunately, there have been women as well as men who, in that altered state, did not have the ability to say no and were harmed. And so, one of the things that has been the challenge for me, and it's one of the things that I've appreciated about being a part of EPIC, is how do we hold folks accountable? And the next question is, before we even get to solutions, can a person be rehabilitated should they ever have access to come back? So, we're looking at all of these various violations from the above ground, even MAPS trials, where there were breaches, to the underground, to the tapped out coalition. The list goes on. But let's say we, as a community, we recognize that there's maybe a practitioner who's doing something unethical or flat out harmful. Right now, we're in a situation where people don't want to say the person's name for fear of retribution or attack or, libel or slander being called. So then what do we do? And if said person is called out, which is happening now in some communities, communities can call out their own members, these faith-based organizations or churches that exist, like in America, for example, they're able to call on their members to bring people out onto the carpet if they've done something bad. But then the next question is, how do we hold them accountable? And what is a sufficient sentence? Do they have to do community service? Do they just have to do some education? Is it a time off and then they're allowed to serve medicine again? Or should they never be allowed?
Yeah, that's a really rich and important question. And part of it is where I want to start with this is just to address the diversity of the space and the communities that work with these medicines, that we're going to have different ways of holding accountable and having that practice, in part just because we want to be able to respect different ways of working with medicine, as well as different communities and different needs, right? It can be a specific, you mentioned like libel, like in Australia, the libel laws and anti-defamation laws are so strong. It's very, very difficult to bring anyone by name without real risk. Whereas somewhere like, the United States, there's certain protections, but even then people are afraid for legal persecution. Will Hall in particular, like when he even came out with his story, he was like, I'm under legal duress, right? And I remember talking to him, it's been a little while now, but it was about a year since the original article, was that he still felt he was under legal threat. And so there's lots of ways to silence survivors. Legally is one of the primary ones, and I think we need to address that and find more ways to support survivors, and that includes all sexual harm, as well as harassment and discrimination. And I think we are not doing enough. I'm hard pressed to find places and examples where I'm like, yeah, they're doing it right. Which that's painful to say. I think we're still being willing to see it. And but in terms of the question of like, well, what do I think or what do I feel in terms of accountability? Should certain people be able to practice again? It does depend on the type of harm, obviously. I think sexual violations in particular, and given psychedelic practice in particular, I think it may be one of those cases where it's a never, and I know that sounds strong to some, but there's lots of other things you could be doing, even if it was regular, not regular therapy. I mean, like, other therapeutic models may be okay, but and there's still vulnerability there, but not this level of vulnerability, right? And this one even it's the case we were talking about with Sess that was what resulted in a death with someone that was known to have suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
The risk was higher. And that's not to say that we're responsible for everything that our clients or our journeyers do, right? There are times that, and I've personally experienced people who've been close to me who had both suicidal ideation and some of whom who did not make it, to be honest. Some that were more, people might consider more empowering end of life choice.
Mhm.
Others, because of actual being in the depths of despair and recovery from substances that were causing the ideation.
Mhm.
And there's a sense of helplessness even when you know that someone is in that real state, that there's limits to what you can do, right? To respect that, because once they're an adult, it's very limiting. Even in the United States, like instances of mental instability and mental health cases that I've dealt with, where we call it 5150, where it's like, are they a danger to themselves or others? And then we have laws that will go into effect, but even those are limited because they only get help for a very short emergency period of time,
Mhm.
and then they're back out on the streets, as it were, or in their lives, as it were, and they don't have that support. And I think we need to take more seriously survivors. We need to create more means and supports to empower them in our communities. Shine Collective is one of the organizations in the psychedelic space. So if you're a survivor and you're looking for support, that's one I would recommend. It's a peer-based support, but also has some therapeutic support. Finding ways amongst ourselves to talk about these issues. So this conversation is so incredibly important. But we also need to build in more accountability. And I think we have to be really honest with ourselves. We do not have sufficient accountability in this space. We cannot currently, even if you knew exactly who someone was who was causing harm, it is very difficult to remove them. And I'm not saying it should be totally easy either. There needs to be, accountability on both sides. But like I know of, like there's a person right now practicing in Costa Rica that a lot of the practitioners in Costa Rica know about,
Mhm.
and removed from one situation, and now that person is practicing independently, and it's a known issue.
Yeah.
And the local authorities have limited ability, power, and means to be able to make that person accountable. And meanwhile, they can advertise internationally, and so that means that there's a lot of the accountabilities on ourselves, unfortunately, to be able to help each other, support each other, educate each other. One of the things that came out of psychedelic survivors before it transitioned, and now we have Shine, is the psychedelic safety flags. So I like to point people to
Yeah.
that document. It's a website and it's a living document, but educating yourself and empowering yourself is important. But and you can already hear in my answer, it's a multifaceted solution.
Yeah.
It's a community challenge. It's a government challenge. It's a challenge of our heart, minds, and spirits. And I think it's pointing out to us that we need to show up more for each other, and that the disenfranchised is all of us, that we can all be in a position of being disempowered and finding ways to empower what some may say the person who's in the minority position. And I'm not necessarily not just racial minorities or sexual minorities or whatever the minority is, that that which we do to the least of us, we've done to the best of us, right? And I think we need to be really honest with ourselves that we have maybe not been as accountable as we could be in how we're showing up, and not just relying on an authority to do that accountability for us, or to create that support that we need for each other, and truly loving and showing up in compassion. And I'm not saying that, authorities shouldn't be held accountable. And it's a complex problem. So we shouldn't expect simple solutions.
Right.
Either.
Are you a therapist, a coach, or a doctor who might be interested in providing safe, ethical, and legal psychedelic preparation or integration? Then check out my new course with the Academy of Therapy Wisdom. It is the trauma-informed psychedelic therapist. I'm really proud of this course. It includes pre-recorded modules as well as live calls and homework and group discussions that will really help you prepare for this exciting field in the most ethical and trauma-informed way. So check that out. If you happen to be a person who wants to prepare for your own psychedelic journey, whether you're doing that with ketamine or in a legal setting or flying to South America, I want you to be prepared. So check out my course, The Ultimate Guide to Safe Psychedelic Preparation. It is a jam-packed, full-on course that will teach you about psychedelic substances, their legality, how to prepare yourself, especially if you've had any trauma in your background, what to look for in a relatable and reliable and safe shaman or psychedelic facilitator. In the Ultimate Guide course, we also meet once a month so that you can ask me questions live. You can also connect with a global community of emerging psychonauts. So check out these two resources for you. I've made them with all of my heart and love so that you can be prepared and be safe. Well, I will put in the show notes the link to the Shine Collective and the safety flag, the red flags. I find that...
We're saying it's green flags too. It's also what we want people to.
Exactly. The green flags are equally important. But I've been sharing that with my students in our apprenticeship program and in our psychedelic preparation course, to just give them a quick way to look through if they're thinking of going and sitting in ceremony with someone. Just read through these flags, red, orange, or green, and also to learn to trust your gut as well. There is one thing that I just wanted to say about this accountability, because you mentioned a practitioner moving from one space and going down to Costa Rica. And if there's no one really going to, regulate them, but we're seeing that in America. I've seen some person who was practicing in New England and there were some violations there, and then moved to California and just set up shop. And this idea about who can police them. I mean, what we have in the United States is the police, right? But only if somebody reports them to the police could the police go and then investigate. As I was reading about some of the complaints that are coming up already in the state of Oregon, which was, for Americans, one of the first places that had it medicalized psilocybin, with these service centers and facilitators. So now people can advertise like, I've got my license, come and see me. And as you've probably seen, some of them were not actually delivering the services in a licensed facilitation center. They've done it in Airbnbs. And there are some cases that are coming up that people have cried fraud, that they've been misled, that some people are saying that they're licensed when they really are not. So what do we do in those cases when even the Oregon Health Authority said themselves, we can't do anything? Like they as a body are not going to go out and search these people out, and they can put them on a list and say that, now we know. So what do we do? I mean, what more do we do other than having these conversations?
Well, I think we need to look for concrete changes, right? And maybe one example I've sometimes given is, where are we dedicating our time, energy, and resources? One of the reasons the Oregon Health Authority cannot do anything is because there are limits in terms of what the law allows them to do and not allow them to do based in terms of how it was set up and how the service centers are set up. Even quote unquote licensed training facilities, they only approve the training program, but the training program isn't accountable to problems in the training program. So, but you can hold the service centers accountable, but then it's finally a complaint and it may not prevent licensure, right? And it may not mean that they get, that you're addressing a particular harmful facilitator because, right, the limits of what is built there. So you can make it stronger. But the other thing in terms of the resources question is that, I find a lot of people are more willing to spend, let's say, several $100s going to a conference than dedicate a portion of the funds that they receive towards these support and accountability practices, or even just their own training, right? And don't just mean like regular training. I mean like ongoing support and accountability and practices. The number one thing that I've been advising people to do, because it's something that's within our power to be able to do, is to have an ethical practices and processes statement. If you're a facilitator, being clear and transparent about, creating your own accountability, literally building your own accountability, and then communicating it clearly. And helps just for yourself to be clear, like, okay, do I have a mentor? How can someone give me feedback? How can I be held accountable? Who does someone contact if they feel like I've had a violation, right? And also just inviting that feedback and including that as part of even the early intake process and saying, like, I am open to feedback. Here's the person who's my mentor. Here's the way to give feedback. Here's the way, and creating even anonymous reporting methods, right? One of the things Epic was motivated for in the big early phases, and it's not that it isn't still important, was to try and find means for creating more of these accountability pieces and maybe to figure out ways of anonymous reporting. And actually I found one, but we need financial support for it.
Yeah.
And so, okay, we're only volunteer run organization. And like, some of the big conferences have gotten more money from one person going than Epic has gotten in its whole entire lifetime. Right. And we're funded primarily by the volunteers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that speaks volumes, or myself, right? Like I'm doing a lot of volunteer work in ethical practice. And on the whole, not that I don't have accountability for how I build my own practice, I do, but also noticing, like, okay, are people willing to pay, to receive that or to get that advising, right? And I think the primary responsibility I'm always going to put on us, because that's our highest point of power. And so having practice and processes statements, getting clear about how we're holding ourselves accountable, and that we can change the whole entire system simply by demanding it for ourselves and as practitioners, and raising the standards of care, and only aligning ourselves with service centers, organizations, and raising the bar as a whole, as a community, and committing to that, and ask, and even like having those conversations with friends, like, hey, what are you doing for accountability? How are you helping to create feedback, and building from the conversations in concrete ways, which is something Epic's been trying to do as well, like creating these living documents where we're actually trying to take the conversations and, like, okay, what can we build from this? How can we co-create from this in any sort of small way and make that transformation happen? But and I think we rely too much on authorities to be able to create accountability for us, and I think taking responsibility, and maybe this because I come from the ethics perspective, that it comes from top down, bottom up, and everywhere in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
And unfortunately, given what we know, as a fact in this space that we have leaders that have caused harm,
Yeah.
that have admitted harm,
Yeah.
right? And some of which are even serving in other countries on advisory boards when they're documented,
Yeah.
right? And you could even ask, in the Ben Sessa case, and I want him to have the most support and transformation possible for him and for people who are around him as well, right? I want to have compassion for all players in this position, but at the same time, like, we have to ask ourselves, like, are they going to be able to continue to practice in other ways? Key speaking influences, being able to train people in other places, or an advisory board, or consulting a corporation or a pharmaceutical company. I think we need to also demand that, these people are not put in those sort of positions anymore of authority. And I think that's also on us as well, that sometimes, and there's been cases where, like, for instance, the Francoise and Erhon case, students have even had to push back on organizations to say,
Mm-hmm.
Please remove them,
Yeah.
because the people in authority weren't doing it, because, they, there's lots of different reasons, but I think taking personal accountability and responsibility ourselves is the number one thing we can do, and finding the others, as it were, and working together to proactively advocate.
Yeah.
And
Well, that has been my approach, since completing this certification program and coming out. It was like, I think also as a physician, I already had that orientation. Like, you need to put your ducks in a row. It's like, this is what we do. But then when I started serving with organizations, big, very shiny named organizations, and you mentioned leadership doing harm, admitting to harm, and then still doing it. I've been working with leadership who's had just blinders on, or just has no self-awareness, or at least not the honesty and integrity to look at their own behaviors and shadows. So much so that I've washed my hands of a couple of these organizations. But it makes me nervous, because on the outside it looks all shiny, and under the hood we're seeing, both in management and some of the facilitators, kind of propping up their accolades and doing business as usual. And so that's been the largest frustration point for me, because I'm training people to do and uphold the highest ethical standards, and I've published extensively about the harms that I've seen in the psychedelic retreat space. But I do want to move to some of the solutions. So we are definitely aligned in, we take responsibility, we seek out others who are willing to go the high road. I personally feel like you and I have shared a little bit about trauma-informed. I teach courses on trauma-informed psychedelic therapy. And that's not just people who've experienced sexual trauma or childhood trauma. There's also race-based discrimination and gender discrimination. And if you are a facilitator that has not been trained with this sort of cultural competency and trauma-informed care, then, in my opinion, I don't think it is ethically responsible for you to be putting out services where you may have these people coming in and you're re-traumatizing or causing more harm. And so that it's a flag that I wave very much. So I want people to be trained. They want them to get their cultural competency. But I think that the biggest piece for me that I've seen in the last 2 years working with these big organizations is that if the management wasn't requiring people to have their feedback system or their own therapist or a peer support or a mentor, then people aren't doing it, because it takes time and it costs money. And I've been doing this for, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. But these are the excuses that I've heard from people, and they are at risk of perpetuating harm because they've got these blinders on. So I don't know what else we can do about raising awareness, but I like the idea of telling potential journeyers to ask your facilitator or your therapist, what is your ethics standards of procedures? Who is your mentor? Are you in therapy yourself? Like, what draws us to this field? So many of us doctors and therapists are wounded healers. We've come to these, not all of us, but many of us have come from troubled pasts. And generally, you need to be treating that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think empowering each other to be able to show up in that way, to even make it culturally and supportive, and the practice to not just do it as a practitioner, but also as someone who is seeking that support. Like this is, normal, like to actually be able to ask for these things, and to
Yeah.
be able to go elsewhere. And and some of the challenges around that, like, as soon as I say that, and even about like you mentioned earlier about, legal things and going to police, which has other complexities with that too, is, on the whole, psychedelic practice is criminalized.
Right.
And there's a lot of taboo around it. And people don't even feel comfortable, even if they're doing it through a legal method, that they can talk about it in the public. And there's a sense, and then you throw in things around having experienced trauma and or struggling with CPTSD, depression over a long period of time, or literally being in a vulnerable position before you even seek treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Um, it makes it even more challenging. There's a lot of barriers that we can remove that don't have to be there. We can allow and support the conversations. I mean, like I have even challenges even using the word psychedelic sometimes in writing on social media because it'll get shadow banned or
Mm-hmm.
it'll be pulled or directly banned. And like, well, I'm literally doing ethics in this space and this shouldn't be a challenge, but people see it as a legal risk, you see?
Right.
And then it, and so if that's happening with just regular everyday conversations, um, we need to remove more of these barriers. But on top of it, like there's also issues of like what I call ethics, what's been called ethics washing,
Oh,
where yeah. I heard, I'm like, oh, I hadn't heard that term recently. I'm like, someone like, oh, okay, I can see that. And it's a way, or sometimes people say virtue signaling.
ah, yes.
It's very in the psychedelic space, in my experience, especially focused on ethics, I've never seen so many people focused on looking
Mm-hmm.
the part of being virtuous and culturally sensitive and supportive, and or even putting people in positions of power that has the nice right, um,
The title.
titles, names, and looking the part of diversity without actually having to support diversity,
No.
or looking like they have ethical practice or have been reformed. That's what I see now. Is like some of these big organizations, like, oh no, we're
Mm.
going to respond and like look at all the changes we've made. It's not us, it's this one person, right? And and I don't have to go over certain ideas, but people need to look more seriously, and get external review and not just internal review. And you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of ethicists examining a lot of these practices. Often it's internal, and often it's a gesture, and sometimes there's very little options for people in terms of where to go. I can think of, I know a lot of training centers in Canada have been having a lot of problems,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm hard pressed currently to be able to recommend any of them.
Yeah. Same with the Netherlands.
Yeah, yeah, and this and I think it helps people to kind of be informed in that it's unfortunate that we're in a sort of caveat emptor, buyer beware, vastly unregulated, unaccountable, space, even in the legal realm. Right? And
Yeah.
that and it's not to create fear or that mindset, but it's to really ground ourselves in the reality of a burgeoning field, that we're new at supporting in the West in various ways, and new to even appreciating the vulnerability and the richness of conscious states. We don't really, like you mentioned, being trauma informed, right? I mean, I haven't had the experience personally of going to any emergency room where I feel like I was treated in a trauma informed way.
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm literally experiencing a trauma. And I have my own, issues and challenges that I've experienced, and then feeling even more traumatized. And I realized, like, thank you to all the nurses and doctors and providers out there. You're in a very extreme, difficult, challenging situations, and you deserve compassion and more support and resources as well. And I think our whole society needs to shift more compassionately.
Hmm.
And I think we do need to do a lot of repair work with traditional medicine keepers and First Nations, and listen to the wisdom that they have, but also not expect them to have the answers or to be willing to give it to us.
Yeah. If you have felt drawn to sit with psilocybin, then I invite you to join us on retreat in the Netherlands, where it is completely legal and safely facilitated with me and an expert team. We are all trauma-trained, trauma-informed, culturally competent and sensitive facilitators, and you will be held with the utmost care so that you can safely dive into your psyche for deep healing and conscious evolution. So check out our website at onedrea.com. That's the number 1DREA.com. And you can learn more about each of our variety of psilocybin truffle retreats in the Netherlands. I look forward to seeing you there. Well, we've run the gamut of this in this conversation, and I think we've touched on a good deal of solutions for what people can do if they're looking to journey, as well as facilitators. What do you want to share that we haven't covered yet before we wrap up?
There are some beautiful, amazing, talented, compassionate facilitators out there that are working diligently to be able to show up in beautiful ways. And they and that, to me, like, I've run into more people myself that are like that. Conversations I've had where trained, experienced people and newly trained people realizing I need more mentorship, I need more support, I need more education. I know this training wasn't enough, and seeking it out and being responsible and building off of it and not expecting the train to be enough. And these experienced facilitators offering their time and their mentorship and sharing the wisdom that they've been receiving. And we do exist, the people do exist, and to just know you deserve to be safe, loved, and supported from beginning to the end of all your journeys.
Hmm. Yes. So well said. So Sandra, of course, I will put links under the show notes here. Where can people get in touch with you and follow your work?
You can go to my website, SandraDreisbach.com, or, look up my Linktree, which is literally Linktree/psychedelic ethics. And would be love to be able to connect with any of you and share more. Or you can check on EPIC, which is Ethical Psychedelic International Community, as well as Nectara, where I'm also director of ethics for. And also, I'd encourage everyone to celebrate World Psychedelics Day, which is going to be on 6/20. So it's so important to come together in community conversation. And I just appreciate this so much, to be able to talk about both the highs and the lows and everywhere in between in a trauma.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra. Blessings to you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please visit SandraDreisbach.com to learn more about her work, her course at Nectara, and you can also check out epicpsychedelic.com if you are a facilitator or therapist in the space and you'd like to connect with a global community around these types of issues. Sandra has also graciously provided a PDF that you can download. So I will include the link on our website where you can get this free ethics and integration PDF. Many, many blessings of thanks and good wishes to Sandra, and good wishes to you on your journey as well. I wish you safety. I wish you blessings and peace as you are on your healing journey. Thank you for tuning into the Conscious Evolution Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, subscribe, and leave us a review and rating on your favorite podcast player. This helps us get the content out to a larger audience. And to watch the video version of the podcast, visit the Pennington Media YouTube channel. Want more info on how psychedelics may improve your mental well-being, how to choose a retreat, or what to look for in a shaman? Get on the Psychedelic Curious email journal. The link is in the show notes and on my website. You can also sign up for my free masterclass series, where each month I take a deep dive into a topic in holistic healing, trauma recovery, self-love, resilience, and psychedelic-assisted therapy.